Whose idea was it to pad your pockets? Was it your idea, or was it the leader of the NDP's?
So congratulations, Mr. Cooper, on your clip. I hope you can get it up before the end of the meeting.
Just answer the question.
Sparks were flying during the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs as the Liberal Minister Dominic LeBlanc was fiercely grilled by opposition parties over the Liberals' push to move the federal election date with Bill C-65.
Let's take a look.
I want to get into the details for Canadians to know exactly how this bill came together in full cooperation with the NDP. I don't want to get too personal, Minister, but do you remember this year on Valentine's Day who you had dinner with?
I do. It was a very romantic moment. I live in New Brunswick. I was in Ottawa. I was away from, obviously, my family. And it was a February night, and we went to a great place called Colonnade Pizza. It's at the corner of Metcalfe and Gilmore. And I went, it's great pizza. I would invite you to go. And my date for that evening was a great guy. You maybe remember him. Daniel Blakey was his name.
Yes, well, thank you. So Daniel Blakey was the lead negotiator for the NDP on this bill. And as a matter of fact, he stood right behind you in March when you made the announcement, and you had said on multiple occasions that this bill was part of the coalition to secure the continued support of the NDP. You even said at the press conference that you gave in response, quote, "The Prime Minister and Mr. Singh agreed to these important measures." Question, whose idea? Was it a Liberal idea or an NDP idea to change the date of the election so that soon-to-be defeated, dozens of them, NDP and Liberal MPs, would be guaranteed their pension? Liberal idea or NDP idea?
And we're off to the races in committee. So, so the NDP and the Liberals were so close. They were celebrating Valentine's dinner together. Anyway.
At a pizza shop. Which I suppose if you're not, if you don't have reservations, a pizza shop would be a great place to go on Valentine's Day.
So here's the part of the bill where it talks about moving the actual election date. So as you can see, they want to move it 1 week later. Now, this is significant because this has been enshrined into law in Canada for a long, long time.
Yeah, it's been enshrined into law. I don't recall the exact year that they passed it, but it was under the Harper administration.
So the issue here is that if the Liberals ended up moving this election 1 day later, it's like 1 day, then you have all these MPs qualifying for their pension. Now you may be wondering, well, how many MPs are going to qualify for that? Well, we did some digging for you. So here's the number of MPs by party that actually would qualify for their pension should the election be moved.
So there would be nearly 80 MPs who are currently in the House that would qualify for their pension if the fixed election date were moved back by 1 week. So the party with the most MPs is actually the Conservatives with 32, followed by the Liberals with 22, then the Bloc Québécois with 19, and the New Democratic Party with 6 MPs who would receive a pension when they otherwise wouldn't if the election were to be held on Monday, October the 20th of 2025. Now, if we go to a snap election, nobody gets their pensions. But if Bill C-65 goes through and the fixed election date is pushed back a week to Monday, October the 27th of 2025, all these MPs will get a pension on the taxpayer's dime.
Now that 6 does not include Jagmeet Singh. So, there's technically 7 New Democratic Party MPs that are waiting to actually qualify for their pension. As of February, that number ticks down because we all know Jagmeet Singh will qualify for his pension at the end of February of 2025. So there you have it. And this just shows the difference, right? The Conservative Party has the most to gain by actually moving this election date. But they're saying, no, That's not right. And that is actually skirting the whole point of the whole pension and qualifying for it. Like, you're supposed to have to qualify for your pension by essentially 2 elections or 6 years in Parliament. So this is the thing. And now people are saying, well, there's been 2 elections since the last time, so it's only fair. No, it's not only fair. You have to be in power at least 6 years.
And these MPs, these 80 MPs who would qualify for their pensions if we go the full term and if the election date is moved back to Monday, October the 27th of 2025. So all these MPs have been paying into the pension fund. If the election falls short, so if either Bill C-65 does not go through, or if we have a snap election that's earlier, these MPs get their pension contributions back plus interest. So it's not like they're completely out the money. They do get their pension payments back.
But they don't get a permanent pension for the rest of their lives.
Right.
That's the difference.
Right.
Mr. Chair, you'll allow me to correct some of the falsehoods in the premise of that question. You referred to a coalition. I know your leader's office wants you to keep using that phrase. We don't have a coalition with the NDP. It's called a supply and confidence agreement. Mr. Blakey, he wasn't the lead negotiator. I'm surprised you're using union terms, Mr. Duncan. That's great to see the Conservative Party has embraced the labor movement.
Did you notice that he used present tense and not past tense when he was saying we actually have not had a supply and confidence agreement?
Right, because this was filmed on Thursday, November the 7th.
Right.
So this is after Jagmeet ripped up the agreement.
Right.
But I just find it amusing. They said, well, we don't have a coalition government. Yeah, because the NDP was too ridiculous to secure a coalition government. The difference between what they have and a coalition government is that with a coalition government, the secondary party, in this case the NDP, would also have members in cabinet. But they weren't smart enough to do that.
No. Terrible negotiators.
100%.
Mr. Blakey was a partner with me as we developed this legislation, something that our leaders agreed to transparently in a supply and confidence agreement that was posted on the internet. So I know that you look for secret sort of meetings. The meeting, the Valentine's Day dinner was so secret, we posted it on Twitter, and our leader...
So, Minister, here's the thing, is that we just got information minutes before this meeting started of, in fact, secret meetings that did take place only after Conservatives asked. We found information here that on January 25th, that there was NDP headquarters representatives that got a meeting with the Prime Minister's office, staff from your office in Elections Canada to get information and briefings behind the scenes, only revealed afterwards. Do you think it's appropriate that the NDP, not just MPs, on 2 different occasions, NDP party headquarters staff got access to the Prime Minister's office and to Elections Canada to get briefings that were not offered to any other party? I don't think Canadians find that very funny, and it was secret until we asked for details.
Again, you're a very experienced sleuth here, Mr. Duncan. I would congratulate you for that investigative work. This is absolutely normal. So do I think it's appropriate? Absolutely. Do I think it's normal in a Westminster parliamentary system where there's a supply and confidence agreement? Of course it is. These were routine meetings of senior officials of the Privy Council office. Mr. Sutherland was in some of these meetings. I was in meetings with Mr. Sutherland and the Chief Electoral Officer himself, where Mr. Blakey was present, so we could understand the advice both of the Privy Council officials and Elections Canada as we work together to develop this legislation. So you find it shocking that parliamentarians work together in a collaborative way. We think it's something that Canadians would find very positive.
This is very interesting because I had made the comment the other day, I think it was on our live stream, that, it's not secretive, it's just not being reported in the media. But now it sounds like it was secretive, that they were having meetings with the administration staff of the NDP and also the chief electoral officer. That doesn't sound usual.
Well, playing devil's advocate, I imagine they had many meetings with the NDP on the pharmacare bill that the Conservatives weren't invited to either. And I imagine there were meetings between the NDP and the Liberals on the dental care bill that the Conservatives weren't invited to.
But those things I think the public knew about through the media. Maybe that's why this feels like it has a shroud of secrecy.
Could be. As again, I'm playing devil's advocate, and we weren't in the meeting, so it's hard to, say that there was nefarious things discussed when we now, have the bill in front of us. So, but I remember when the bill was essentially tabled and the NDP either were genuinely or feigned surprise when they saw that the election date had been moved there. So I believe they were surprised about that and had actually said, we're not going to be supporting that.
I suppose that does make sense. It is a government bill, meaning the government can do what it wants with it.
They could have. It was the same as the Pharmacare bill.
But why would you work so hard to create this bill with the NDP and then at the last minute slip something else in there?
Because they're liberals.
No, that can't be a reason. Like it doesn't make sense to do all this work and then slip something in there when you need the support of the NDP for this bill to pass, and then now it's not going to pass because of that thing you slipped in there. Like it just makes no sense.
It's possible that they thought that that would be kind of like the slam dunk for the NDP because they would have calculated that 6 of their members would have qualified for their pension, and that's 25% of their caucus.
Yeah, but I mean, the Conservatives have the most to gain, and they're vehemently against it.
Well, there you go. So it's hard to know, but let's see where this goes.
Not find positive is that NDP party headquarters staff were invited and attended those meetings. That is completely inappropriate of what happened there, where one political party was given access to information and documents and crafted a bill. But I'll go back again. The whole point that now the NDP absolutely wants to ignore and forget about was the changing of the election date. Was it a Liberal idea or an NDP idea to move back the election by a week so it guarantees any defeated Liberal and NDP MPs their pension? Whose idea was it, the Liberals or the NDP?
So again, you're a very clever clip you just got for some post that you may do later. But I think it's important for people to understand that pension entitlement had nothing to do with that decision to move the date. I'm lucky enough, I was elected in 2000, so it certainly wasn't my idea to be concerned about pension entitlement for myself. We think that Diwali is an important moment for a very significant community in Canada. There are municipal elections in the province of Alberta on that date. We worked with Elections Canada on a number of different scenarios of different dates. But as I said, Mr. Duncan, in order to reassure you that the little premise of your question, which you fabricate, wasn't the case, we would welcome this committee's judgment in moving the date and would welcome that when you get to the clause by clause, feel free to work with colleagues if you're so outraged and you want to explain why Diwali or the municipal elections in Alberta aren't important. Go ahead. But anytime you move the date, you're going to bump into a problem somewhere.
And here's the thing, Minister, is that it's not about Diwali, because what happened was when you moved it back a week, it then coincided with the territorial election and overlaps into Quebec. What you could have done was move the election earlier if that was truly the reason, and it's not. It's about securing the pensions by giving the election happening a week later. People know that because even just last week we heard when we asked your own officials, why don't you call it earlier, including into the summer? And it was, quote, the sorts of considerations that were made, you wouldn't want to break with summer holidays through Labor Day. That was the reason your officials said it didn't get moved earlier. So, Minister, I'll ask you, you don't want to have an election that coincides through Labor Day. When was the last time that happened?
I haven't taken note of every election. I remember one.
Let me
you
answer
asked
for
me
you,
a question.
Minister. It was the last election. It was the last election.
Either way,
the Prime Minister.
You'd think he'd remember that one. I guess they were so busy dodging the lab scandal that they just forgot, right?
Labor Day.
But I think it's a good question. Number one, why are fixed elections in October? Why not September when they get back from the House for the summer? It makes more sense to me, at least, that they would end the session in June, go to campaign all summer long, and then come back in September and we have an election. Like, that to me makes more sense than having it in October.
Or, you can even like it's hard to even say, but maybe you have it in August, and then maybe the transfer of power happens in September. I don't know, but either way, the honest thing to do is exactly what the Conservative said, is you move it back even a week.
Yeah, move it forward. Well, if you move it backwards a week, so instead of Monday the 20th to the 13th, well, that's Thanksgiving, so you can't do that. But why are they on a Monday? Why can't they be on a Tuesday? Why can't they be on a Friday? Like, why can't they be on any day in between? We have advanced polls that people can go to. I really don't see the utility in having it specifically on a Monday. Maybe it's in keeping with tradition. I honestly have no idea. But I think that Mr. Duncan made a great point. Why don't you move it sooner?
Mr. called it
Mr.
when it was
Duncan.
opportunistic for him, and now suddenly you
Mr.
forget when
Duncan.
the last election was called.
This is
Interesting.
the second time now today that I have had members around this table not respond to my intervention. And you guys are going to flip out in 45 minutes from now, or 40 minutes from now, or 30 minutes from now when I try to end this meeting because you say there wasn't enough time for the minister. Respect the authority of the chair to try to operate the meeting in an effective and an efficient manner. Minister, there's no time left for a response. There's no time left for a question. Mr. Turnbull, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
And that's how you do it.
And this is a Liberal chair, but the chair is right.
Again, credit where credit's due. When you intervene as chair, I think that was a very effective way of doing it, and it was an appropriate time to do it as well.
Right, and it doesn't matter who's saying what, doesn't matter what you're in the middle. When the chair speaks, you have to be quiet because the chair is in charge of the meeting. Period. So it doesn't matter who's the party, you have to respect the chair. I completely agree.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. Minister, as I'm sure you've seen here and in many other meetings, we know that the facts just don't seem to matter to our Conservative colleagues, which is really upsetting to see. They are very, very good at making clips, though, and I just want to acknowledge that often those clips are posted before we even leave the meeting, so I will give them credit for being exceptional clippers. At the risk of... yes, and my colleagues are agreeing that they are very good at clipping, so that's good. Mr. Chair, my question to the minister today is around the election date. Now, at a risk of repeating myself over and over again, as soon as the implications to MP pensions was brought to my attention and my colleagues of the NDP attention, I was immediately up in the House of Commons proposing a solution to remove the clause that would make that come into effect. My colleagues, on the other hand, stood up to try to have the entire bill completely delayed, not put into place because they don't want to see improvements to our elections process. They want to keep it exactly the way it is because it benefits them. And so my question to you, Minister, is I put forward an amendment on June 18th. My colleague MP Matheson put forward an amendment on June 18th to remove the clause that would put this unintended benefit, at least that's what I would assume it would be, unintended benefit to the MP's pensions, to remove that portion. Would you be in support of that amendment to see that portion removed?
Again, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Barron, thank you for the question. I won't be voting at this committee when you do your clause-by-clause work. You can speak to my Liberal colleagues and see how they will vote. I have said that as a representative of the government, if the committee decides to change that date, return the date 7 days earlier, that's entirely up to the committee. The pension consideration was not the consideration in the numerous so-called secret discussions that I would have had with your former colleague, Daniel Blakey, who stood with me when we announced this bill, including the date. I just draw your attention to that. But the controversy is such that if people want to change the date, that's fine. I do totally agree with you, Ms. Barron, that the Conservatives use that. Again, I was fisheries minister. There's an expression in English, red herring. They use that as an excuse to ensure that some of the things that we worked on, the NDP caucus and our government, to make voting more accessible. Do you think the Conservatives, Ms. Barron, want to have campus voting? Of course they don't. You think they want to ensure that mail-in ballots are more accessible? No. Everything they have done when Mr. Polyev had my job at democratic institutions was to make voting more difficult. So you're right. They'll sort of contourner. They'll frame the argument around a date to distract from what I think, I don't know if you agree with me, is a desire to ensure that we don't either strengthen the elections regime to resist foreign interference as recommended by the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada, or deal with some of those accessibility issues that I think all parliamentarians should be interested in.
So as a democracy, you want as many people voting as possible. You want voting to be as accessible as possible. However, if it's overly accessible, then that invites scandal, that invites
Opportunity to tamper.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So you want it accessible so that actual citizens can vote, but not overly accessible so that interference can be present.
Yeah, and there's already advanced polls. I don't think there's really been an issue. So you have the two, I think, you have the advanced polling days and then election day. So I don't really see what the issue is. And your employer must allocate time, paid time to their employees in order to go and vote. So I don't see what the issue is. One of the issues that they want to, or one of the amendments they actually want to put in, is they want to allow Canadians to actually vote at any polling station in their area.
Yeah, so what that would mean is that right now you get your voter card in the mail, and then it's got your polling station written on it. It's got all the times and the dates if you wanted to use an advanced poll or if you want to go on election day. And you go to your specific polling station. When you get there, you show them ID and your voter card, and then they check you off a list because they know exactly who's expected to be at that polling station. One of the complaints that they received in the last election was that people were showing up to any polling station that was not their polling station, and then they were not permitted to vote, and that they were too far away from their proper polling station to actually vote on time. So what is being proposed is some sort of system where you can show up to any polling station and cast your vote. I honestly would be very curious to see how Elections Canada is going to do that, because they don't particularly like technology. Everything is done in Elections Canada. It's done on paper. So how could you have somebody show up to vote at a polling station that's not theirs? You won't be able to check them off a list. And then how do you know that they're not going to go to another polling station and do the exact same thing and vote twice or three times or however many times? Is this a legitimate concern? I don't know, because I have no idea what kind of technology or system that they're going to implement to prevent that. So that would be my concern with voting at a polling station that you're not assigned to. Maybe Elections Canada already has something in place to prevent those individuals from voting twice. I really don't know. But to me, that's one of the things that I don't think should be on this bill.
Well, and the whole point of having voters basically assigned to one polling station is also to manage the volume of people that actually go to these voting stations. So you don't end up people lining up for hours and hours and hours,
right,
like what happens down in the United States when they vote.
Right. I mean, we prefer to go to advanced polls anyways because there's hardly anybody there. But on election day, what if everybody just decides to go to, this poll right here in the middle?
Imagine the GTA.
What if they're understaffed? How can they prepare for some unknown number of people? These are all things that Election Canada is going to have to figure out if this bill goes through.
Thank you, Minister. I agree with a lot of what was said, and I believe that it is vitally important for us to be sitting around this table and talking about how to strengthen our elections. So I'm happy that we are discussing this bill today. There are some concerns that have been brought forward that I wanted to quickly ask when we had representatives from the CLC and the PSAC that were here. They were speaking to the concerns around they're nervous that the existing legislation is too broad and that it doesn't specify the right for unions to be able to communicate freely with their members. I'm wondering if you can clarify if you share that concern, and if you see any concerns with us making any amendments to this bill to ensure that those rights are protected.
Okay. I have a big problem with what she's talking about. Unions, in my opinion, should be shutting up about anything political in terms of influencing their members on how they're supposed to vote. If you go on the PSAC website, all you see is NDP, vote NDP, vote NDP, make sure you get out and vote NDP. You know what? No. Your union is not only kind of work related, but it's also political related. And people don't choose to be a part of that union because they're supporting the NDP. They don't have a choice.
Yeah, usually if you get a job and it's a union job, you have to join that union, and too bad if you don't want to.
And I'm sorry, but no. The union should not have any right to tell employees how to vote, just as normal work leadership teams don't have the right to tell their employees how to vote. It is completely wrong, and it's not in the spirit of democracy.
Right. I mean, could you imagine joining a union, having to pay union dues, and you're essentially like paying these guys to tell you how you should vote?
It's ridiculous. And then they use your union dues to actually create propaganda to actually try and influence how you're going to vote. It's insane. So no, that shouldn't be protected. What should the union be communicating to the union on? Union-related matters. That's it.
Ms. Barron, thank you for the question. Again, I certainly wouldn't purport to offer advice to a standing committee of the House that hasn't begun its clause by clause and what amendments in the judgment of the committee would be appropriate to pass. But I do share your concern. These particular elements of the bill, and maybe Mr. Sutherland has more technical experience than I would have in terms of the origin of this particular measure, it was specifically to ensure that the ability of unions or other third parties, we're focusing on unions, but other third parties that can participate in communications with their members in an election, have obligations under the Act to register. I think it's important that there be a transparency in terms of what unions would be doing, either in terms of third-party spending, advertising, but also in terms of communicating with their members. I think the concern was around not having a foreign actor use a particular union or other third-party participant in the election as a front to inappropriately or illegally interfere in the Canadian election. So there's a long history of unions, something we support, participating in the democratic process. So we would certainly share the concern that you have expressed and that union leaders would express around not inadvertently restricting what is a long-standing practice of unions being able to participate in the election. But it has to be done in a transparent way so that foreign money wouldn't flow to a union, or that a union, and it's not one of the big unions that you mentioned that might have been at this table, they're long-standing, reputable organizations that have existed for a long time. I think the concern may be around a smaller group that would suddenly, and we've seen it with respect to the earlier conversation around some Russian influence. One has to be careful to ensure that there's transparency and rigor, but in no way would we seek to limit what has been a historical right for them to participate in an electoral process, unions or other third parties.
Minister,
we think that's a good thing.
That's all.
I don't understand what he means by participating in the electoral process. Individuals participate in the democratic process, or at least that's the way it's supposed to work.
I think they mean that, like, a union can't or shouldn't be taking money and running ads for, like, the NDP. That's what I got out of that. Maybe I'm misinterpreting it.
Well, they're talking about restrictions so that they shouldn't be receiving foreign money to influence how they are communicating to their caucus, or their membership, right? So let's say the Russians really want QP 109 to vote conservative for some reason. They want to prevent unions from being able to take money from foreign actors in order to actually say, sure, now we'll communicate to all of our members to vote conservative.
I also wonder if it's to neutralize channels like Northern Perspective, where, we are conservative leaning. I'm voting conservative. Ryan's voting conservative. Unless they do something really, really horrible between now and the next election. That's who we're voting for. A lot of our reporting centers on the Conservatives. I imagine that most of our viewership will be voting conservative as well. But we really just want people to vote. I mean, if you look at all this information and you go, you know what, I'm still going to vote Liberal. Like, I don't agree with you, but you need to exercise your right to vote for the party or the candidate that you believe is going to do the best job.
Yeah, as long as you've done some homework and you have an informed vote, sure, we can disagree on, why you're voting for who you're voting for, which is fine. But if it's an informed vote, that's great. I've been around like younger people that will come up to me and say, "Who should I vote for?" And I want to smack them. It's like, you shouldn't be asking other people who to vote for. Well, if you tell me to vote, for Conservative, I'm like, no, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. What I'm going to do is say, here's all the information. Now make an informed vote. That's the way our society is supposed to run. And it shouldn't be having union executives essentially using their leverage to tell their membership how to vote and imply that if they don't vote a certain way, then there's going to be consequences. That's a problem.
Thanks very much, Ms. Barron. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, you have stated with respect to the clause in the bill that pushes back the date of the next federal election that the reason for that was to avoid a conflict with the holiday. You said that before, you said it at committee, but the date that was selected conflicts with the territorial election in Nunavut. And the chief electoral officer came before this committee and indicated that that would significantly strain electoral resources in Nunavut. So you talked about the holiday being important. I agree it is important. I agree the Alberta municipal elections are important. But do you not think the territorial election in Nunavut is also important? And why is it that of all the dates that were chosen, you chose that specific date?
So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Cooper, I think, identifies again something which I said is an ongoing challenge with a fixed election date. I hope Mr. Cooper in the House of Commons hasn't been using in any of his questions the silly phrase about time being up. Because, Mr. Cooper, you would, of course, want to have an election right now, so you shouldn't be worried about a fixed election date next October. But I'm glad you're turning your attention to that.
In solving this problem, you've created another problem in terms of a date that conflicts with a territorial election, which will have an adverse impact on the territory in terms of conducting two elections on the same date. But, Minister, it does solve one problem, a problem not that Canadians have, but a problem that NDP Liberal politicians have, and that is that soon-to-be defeated NDP and Liberal MPs who would not qualify for their pension will suddenly collect their pension. They're going to pad their pockets. That's what the effect of it would be, is to pad the pockets of soon-to-be defeated NDP Liberal MPs. The fact that you profess ignorance of that fact is only because you've been caught, and the fact that you're willing to back down is, again, because you've been caught. Canadians have realized that that is exactly what you did or tried to do. So I'm going to put the question to you once again, a question you refused to answer when Mr. Duncan asked you. Whose idea was it to pad your pockets? Was it your idea, or was it the leader of the NDP's idea?
I think that's a great point that Michael Cooper makes, is that even though the Conservatives have the most members at 32 that would stand to benefit from this, are they really going to be benefiting? Because I would find it hard to believe that any of them would be losing their seat. It's going to be Liberal and NDP members who are going to be losing their seats and therefore won't get reelected and therefore won't qualify for a pension normally.
Well, and this is the thing, right? But I also find it interesting how LeBlanc was like, well, there's never a good date to have an election on. Okay, wait, so you would rather completely compromise, and I don't mean compromise as in tamper with, I mean introduce a lot of problems to the Nunavut election day than interrupt a holiday.
Well, if you're looking strictly at numbers, I suppose you could make the argument that there's only about 35,000 people living in Nunavut. So maybe, okay, we can bother those people, and then there's, I don't even know how many, possibly millions, that would be celebrating Diwali, but that's what the advance polls are for. I encourage everybody to take advantage of your advance polls. Like, we've been doing it for years and we love it. There's
Yeah.
nobody there. It's in and out and you're done. It's awesome.
Like, by all means, have the election day on Christmas Day. I will go to the advance poll so I don't have to go and vote on Christmas Day. Done. And this is the question. Why could you not have moved it earlier?
Thanksgiving.
Or Friday. The Friday.
Right. Why does it have to be a Monday?
So congratulations, Mr. Cooper, on your clip. I hope you can get it up before the end
Just
of the
answer
meeting.
the question.
In the premise to your question, you had a series of, again, I find it very arrogant, Mr. Chair, that one would say soon to be defeated MPs. I wouldn't purport to decide how the voters in Edmonton, St. Albert will deal with Mr. Cooper in the next election. There's a certain arrogance, I think, from the Conservatives to say that, first of all, their members who would have, in their obsession with the pension focus, have benefited also. The idea that none of them might risk being defeated is the supreme arrogance I find.
Minister, answer the question. Whose idea was it? Was it your idea? Was it the leader of the NDP's idea? I asked you a very straightforward question. Answer the question.
So, Mr. Chair, we have explained when we introduced the bill that we had worked on this bill with the NDP caucus, as in the case it was Mr. Blakey, with respect to an agreement that Mr. Singh and the Prime Minister made. And we have noticed the manufactured indignation from the Conservatives around this issue. I agree with Ms. Barron to perhaps prevent them from dealing with what we think are substantive and positive issues in this.
When you had your behind closed doors secret meeting with the NDP, we see in response that Al Sutherland attended that meeting, but who in the PMO sat in on that meeting with officials in the NDP?
Again, Mr. Chair, it was such a secret meeting at a great pizza place on Metcalfe that we posted it on Twitter. But
referring to the meeting on January 25th, where the chief electoral officer, among others, met with officials in the NDP. And the question we had asked was, who in the PMO, who in your office was at that meeting, if any?
So it's obviously really safe to say that it was most likely the Liberals that actually, decided that this was going to be, a amendment to the bill to move the election.
What makes you say that?
Because it would have been really easy for them to say, well, it was the NDP, to put the blame on them. Would have been really easy for them to do that.
What if it was a joint thing? What if they both went, well, we're going to lose a lot of seats with the way we've been behaving, so we should try to... We can retain power for longer. We can prevent revolt within our caucuses by telling our MPs, well, if we go the full term, then you guys will get your pensions.
It's possible. I found it interesting, though, that the NDP ended up, protesting against it and immediately introducing a amendment to the bill when this was announced. So it also makes me wonder, is there two different, and this is what we surmised before, is there kind of two different groups in the NDP caucus? Is there like the senior caucus, and those are the ones that are trying to basically run the party, and they're telling everybody what to do. And then there's the disgruntled rest of the caucus that is getting really annoyed with how Jagmeet is running the party, and maybe they didn't know until this actually happened, but the rest of them did.
You might be onto something, because we have been told by our insiders that there is malcontent within the NDP as well. Like, they're almost as fractured as the Liberals.
Yeah, they're just smart enough not to make it public.
Oh, again, Mr. Sutherland addressed that. He was at that meeting. By recollection, I think the meeting took place in my office in the Confederation building. There was nobody from the Prime Minister's office in that meeting. I certainly don't have a recollection of that. I was working with a parliamentarian from another caucus who shared our objective in preparing this legislation, and we were lucky to benefit from the nonpartisan advice of both senior public servants and Elections Canada. There's no mystery. The Conservatives find it shocking that people would work together to try and improve our electoral system. I don't think Canadians find it shocking that parliamentarians would work together to strengthen our democracy as opposed to try and vandalize it like Mr. Cooper would.
That was rude. I don't think Cooper would vandalize our democracy.
No, LeBlanc just has to get his clips in, right? Right, LeBlanc? Oh, wait, you guys don't even know how to use Facebook. So.
No, they don't. And that's why everybody's so bitter at the Conservatives, that they have such a really good social media game that they make comments about it in committee.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like even the NDP. Well, the NDP doesn't have any money to actually do anything.
But you know what? If the Liberals or the NDP actually did anything right, did anything that was positive for Canadians, maybe they would have channels like Northern Perspective talking about them on social media.